Welcome Professor Louis Newman, who is joining us as our scholar in residence. Professor Newman is he's an academic who's worked at Carleton in the Midwest, West or Midwest? Somewhere there, yeah. It's Minnesota anyway. And Stanford. He's the author of numerous books on Jewish ethics, and really, his books are absolutely wonderful. So you should check them out if you haven't yet. We're all looking forward to Professor Newman's speeches both tonight, Dvar Torah, tomorrow morning, in the afternoon, and then on Sunday. It's really going to be an exciting weekend. So with lots of diverse topics, so I hope people join us. You're also a grandfather, so Mazel Tov, and he actually is distinguished as being the husband of a rabbi. Now, what do you call the wife of a rabbi? What do you call the husband of a rabbi? Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Kunin. And I am indeed lucky. If you know my wife, you would know that I am actually very, very lucky. Thank you all for inviting me to share this weekend with you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I too want to thank everyone who had a part in this, the committee that worked on this for so long, and again, to congratulate you. I gather this is part of your 50th anniversary year, and congratulations. 60th, I'm sorry, I got it wrong, 60th anniversary year. I actually knew that, I don't know why I got that wrong. And I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and thank you so much. All of us deal with ethics every day of our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. Ethical issues are woven into the fabric of our lives in a way that makes them ubiquitous and unavoidable. Yet most of the time, these everyday ethical issues don't come into conscious awareness. If you reflect on your own experience for a moment, you'll immediately realize that this is so. In the course of the day, just today, each and every one of us here, I'm sure, has faced a multitude of ethical situations. Did I discipline my children when they misbehaved in a way that was loving or shaming, gentle or harsh? Did I give any money to that person on the street corner asking for my spare change, or did I walk by? Or by extension, did I make a contribution to the organization that sent me a mail solicitation along with several others, especially this time of year, or did I toss it out? Did I admit to my coworkers that I simply forgot to do something I'd promised to finish? Or did I make up an excuse or try to evade responsibility in some other way? Was I short or patient with that cashier who was evidently new to his job? Ethics is about right and wrong in our dealings with one another, about our character and the values we live by. And that is why it is so inescapable. Virtually every interaction we have with another person has an ethical component, for our interaction reveals something of our moral character, for better or worse. But even if we let many of these ethical moments pass unnoticed, even if we live, so to speak, on ethical autopilot, all of us have ideas about what makes for a good moral life. Let us set aside those moments, and they are generally infrequent, actually, when we find ourselves in a true moral quandary and genuinely don't know the right thing to do. In point of fact, most of the time, we do know what we think is right and good, though we sometimes choose to violate our own moral principles. And what's more, most of us agree about these things most of the time. And that's true even if we would have a hard time articulating those moral principles clearly or defending them if someone challenged us. Now, I want to test this right now with a brief experiment, and I hope you'll indulge me. I want to invite you, I understand that all of you pretty much know one another. You're all regulars. I was told that earlier in the evening. You're sitting next to other people, or you could move hopefully close to someone. And I invite you to answer this simple question to one another. Turn to one another and answer the question. I'll give you a few minutes. What makes for an ethical life? What are the qualities of a good person? Go ahead, take a few minutes. Just another few seconds and then we'll come back together. All right. If we had the time, I would be happy to collect your reflections, and perhaps after I'm done tonight, we'll have an opportunity to share them a bit. But if you're like most Jews, and perhaps even most people, you probably listed qualities like honesty, integrity, caring for others, generosity, compassion, and fairness. Perhaps you focused on specific actions like volunteering your time, or giving money to charity, or working for social justice. But I'm willing to gamble that you probably did not say cultivating a deeper relationship with God. And that's because most of us think of ethics in a secular way. It is about our moral values, not our religious experiences. This evening, though, I want to challenge this conventional way of thinking about ethics. I want to suggest that we lose something essential to Jewish ethics when we leave God and religion out of it. Jewish ethics cannot so easily be divorced from an awareness of our being created by God, dependent on God, and accountable to God. Within Judaism, ethics is inextricably bound up with religion, and our ethical lives, yours and mine, will be richer if we too think of our ethics as part and parcel of our relationship with God. Now, I want to pause here to offer just a couple of clarifications. First, I don't mean to suggest that people who believe in God are more moral than those who don't. We all know secular people who are moral heroes and religious people who do morally unacceptable, sometimes even reprehensible things. My point is about what Judaism teaches, not how people actually behave. And Judaism teaches that we should consider our moral decisions in the context of our relationship with God. Second, I want to emphasize that when I say God, I do not mean to invoke some anthropomorphic being described in many places in the Torah and in our liturgy, the sort of powerful, masculine figure imagined by Michelangelo in his famous frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I personally do not believe in such a God. I suspect that many of you don't either. I encourage you to think of God, for purposes of this discussion, less in human terms and more abstractly, as the ultimate source of power, of goodness, of creativity, and of life. I think many of us do believe in this sort of God and sense that we are in God's presence when we experience great beauty, when we witness a birth or a death, when we connect deeply to the earth, to art, or to another human being. My question tonight, then, is what difference it makes when we think about ethics in the context of a relationship with that sort of God. Let me explore this connection between ethics and God by focusing our attention for a moment on a famous prophetic teaching from the book of Micah, one with which I think you are probably familiar. God has shown you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, only to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So says Micah. Prophet is capturing what many of us have regarded as one of the most inspired and succinct expressions of Jewish ethics. What God wants of us is simple, Micah says. Be just, which means treat all people fairly and with dignity. Be merciful, which means be compassionate and forgiving. So far, so good. But then we come to that final clause, the one that I think gets the least attention. What, after all, does it mean to walk humbly with your God? What is humility doing in this list alongside justice and compassion? And what does humility have to do with God? As we begin to explore these questions, I think the connection between God and ethics begins to come more clearly into view. I suggest we begin at the beginning, at the story of the creation of humankind as the Torah tells it. God creates the first human from the dust of the earth. And then in God's last words to Adam, he is told, out of the ground you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The most basic fact about us is that we are mortal. Our days are numbered. And though we frequently avoid saying so in polite company, we all know that as surely as we are sitting here tonight, we will one day be no more. We avoid confronting our mortality until we are forced to, in part, I think, because we live in a death-denying society. But at an even more basic level, we don't want to focus on our mortality because it would raise questions for which we may not have good answers. What does my life amount to? What will my legacy be? What can I do that is meaningful and enduring, given that my physical existence is so transient? Focusing on our mortality makes us humble, for it reminds us of how little significance our individual lives may have in the grand scheme of things. Now, the popular medieval Jewish thinker Bachya ibn Pekuda made the point even more forcefully and graphically. He wrote, and I quote, "When one thinks of the transient character of his existence, how swiftly death comes, at which time his desires and hopes are cut off, and he must leave all his possessions and relinquish the idea that he can take any of them as provision for the hereafter, or that any of these will be of use to him when he is in the grave. The light of his countenance gone, its brightness dimmed, his body breeding worms, turning into corruption and deliquescence, the marks of his physical beauty vanished, corpse emitting an increasingly foul odor, as if it had never been washed or cleaned. When these and similar considerations enter his mind, he will become humble and lowly. He will not be proud. His heart will not uplift itself arrogantly." Bachya's language is stark and perhaps even shocking, but his point is one that we might well take to heart. When we consider that God has created us as very fragile, transient creatures, we cannot help but be humble about who we are and the role we play in the world around us. But the Torah teaches us about humility in other ways, especially whenever it reminds us about our dependence on God. When the Israelites are about to enter the promised land, God tells them, again quoting this time from Deuteronomy, "Take heed lest you forget the Lord your God, when you have eaten and are full and have built goodly houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up and you forget the Lord your God. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is God who gives you power to get wealth. The point could not be clearer, or I might add, more relevant to our own lives today. When we thrive, it's tempting to feel proud of our accomplishments and to take credit for what we've achieved. But if we think about it just a bit more, we realize that our accomplishments are inevitably dependent on things over which we have very little control. Our health, our abilities to imagine, plan, organize, evaluate, and engage in a host of other cognitive functions, and the natural resources that the earth provides us, and that's to name just a few. These are all God's gifts to us. To acknowledge them fully is to realize that our lives and our achievements are not really ours alone. In fact, all our endeavors are dependent on myriad forces working together that enable us to survive and thrive. To be self-important or arrogant is to deny these very basic truths about our existence. In light of these facts, humility is the only posture that makes any sense at all. Finally, humility is related to Judaism's teaching that all of us are accountable to God for the choices we make. This is captured in Pirkei Avot. Reflect on three things, and you will never come to sin. What is above you, a seeing eye, a hearing ear, and all your deeds recorded in a book. In classically anthropomorphic terms, the rabbis are telling us that God knows all our deeds and forgets none of them. Even when we successfully hide our misdeeds from others, we cannot hide them from God. And this is so even if, as I suggested earlier, we leave aside any thought of God's having eyes or ears. Consider the case of lying. When you really analyze it, I think we lie because we want to make ourselves look better in the eyes of others than we really are. Deceiving others in this way is in fact a form of arrogance. It's a way of saying, I can create the truth that I want you to believe, even though I know it's not really the truth. In this way, I will manipulate you and control your impression of me. The rabbi's point is just this. Before God, before the ultimate source of life, there is no possibility of deception. In the rabbi's words, the seal of God is truth. The truth of who we are or what we have done is absolute. We cannot change it. The problem is just that we have trouble being seen as we truly are. For to be seen as we really are, with all our flaws and misdeeds intact, would make us humble indeed. So in all these teachings, our tradition is telling us that humility is intimately linked to God as the source of our lives, which are transient, our benefactor, who provides us with all the things we need to thrive, and the ultimate source of truth and goodness, before whom we are accountable. Now again, I cannot claim, as I mentioned earlier, that believing these things about God will necessarily make us more moral, but most assuredly, it will make us think about morality differently. Let me spell out a few of what I see as the most important implications. If we live our lives with a keen awareness of our mortality, starting with that first one, there will be an urgency to our moral choices. We dare not wait until tomorrow to give tzedakah or to seek forgiveness from those we have hurt, since for all we know, we may never get the chance. There is a finality to human life and an unpredictability, which makes every moral decision important and inescapable. In the words of William Penn, I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any fellow creature let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. Though I did not know it when I first discovered that quote as a child, Penn could easily have been quoting one of the ancient rabbis. Simply put, the idea that God created us as mortal creatures undermines any pretense to arrogance and lends our moral lives their urgency. Second piece. If we live our lives with an awareness of all the blessings that have been showered upon us, we will not only be humble about our accomplishments, our moral deeds will be rooted in a sense of gratitude. We are all recipients of gifts which we did nothing to earn and over which we exercise little to no control. If what we typically think of as ours is not really ours at all, then sharing it is only natural. Our material possessions, our intellectual property, our love, these things belong to us only in a provisional way, as endowments that come to us and that we pass along to others. In this vision of a moral life, I am but a conduit for God's benevolence as it moves through the world. My role is to reflect God's goodness in the goodness I do to and for others. I am not, as so much Western moral philosophy has claimed, an autonomous individual with specific rights. I am rather an instrument of God's blessing. And so I will approach my moral situation with a sense of gratitude for the opportunity to make my life an extension of God's goodness. Finally, if we live our lives with the belief that we are accountable, this is the third piece, to an ultimate standard of truth, that we cannot escape from our moral responsibilities. Even if we succeed in hiding our misdeeds from others and so avoid punishment from any human agent, they are known. In the rabbi's terms, they are seen. In the words of our high holiday literature, you recall all that is forgotten and will open the book of remembrance, which speaks for itself, for our own hands have signed the page. It would be so much easier to imagine that moral responsibilities are like legal ones. If we're accused of some wrongdoing, we'll make an excuse, try to find a loophole in the law, perhaps hire a crackerjack lawyer who can persuade a jury that there's reasonable doubt about our guilt. We do this knowing all the while that we are in fact guilty. But if there is an ultimate source of truth, make that a capital S, against which our lives are measured, then we know that all these are but ploys, vain efforts to change the reality of what we have done. In the presence of God, or if you prefer, before the bar of absolute truth, no evasion of responsibility is possible. In this vision of life, our moral behavior is a matter of utmost seriousness. In short, being moral may not be easier if we imagine ourselves in the presence of God, but it means something different. It is grounded in a profound sense of our creatureliness, our dependence on God, and of our inescapable accountability for all that we make of our lives. It means that our morality is deeply tied to a religious vision of what it means to be human. The rabbis sum up this vision of our humanity when they admonish us, know your origin, your destination, and before whom you're required to give an accounting. This again is from Pirkei Avot. Your origin, a putrid drop of semen. Your destination, a place of dust, worms, and maggots. Before whom will you be required to give an accounting? Before the King of Kings, the Holy One, praised be God. Think about those three. Our physical lives begin in nothingness and end in nothingness. This is surely enough to make us humble, but it also puts our moral lives in a radically different perspective. For while our physical lives are transitory, our moral deeds endure. Our glory, our greatness, is that everything we do is known to the Creator of all life, the Holy One, whose name is truth. Now, to live in this way is to know that in the final analysis, it is through our moral choices that our lives have meaning and find fulfillment. Yes, our sojourn on this earth is relatively short and unpredictable. Our end is dust. But our moral lives can lift us above these physical realities and bring us honor. As Micah taught so long ago, this is what God requires of us: to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. We can, if we choose, think about our ethics as if it were only about ensuring a stable, functioning society or maximizing pleasure or some other human good. But if our ethics are to be truly Jewish, they must be grounded in something transcendent, in an awareness of where we come from, where we are going, and before whom we must ultimately give an account of our lives. All our moral deeds, including our acts of justice and of mercy, will then be permeated with a sense of walking humbly with God. And that journey will then be one of blessing for us and for all those we encounter along the way. Shabbat Shalom. Sure, if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So if we can leave the questions, so make a question, not a statement. So, and leave it succinct so we can have time for as many people as want to ask a question. So very succinct, great questions would be greatly appreciated. Yeah.
So what do we say about evil people?
What do we say about evil people? Well, let's take that apart for a minute. What do we mean by evil people? People who do evil, people who are intrinsically evil? I'm not sure Judaism exactly believe that there are texts that talk about the Rasha Gamur, somebody who's completely evil. But even then, sometimes they talk about the completely evil person having a little bit of goodness in them. So what does that mean? I'm not sure what people who are evil exactly means. People who do evil things, for sure. There are lots of those. Probably some of them, including myself, are in this room, right? But you mean people who are primarily evil.
People whose lives are defined by their evil deeds.
People whose lives are defined by their evil deeds. Well, what I would say is they're very dangerous. They're very misguided. They're very self-centered. And they don't have a clue about any of the things I just talked about.
Thank you, Rick.
Right? I mean, I don't know how to answer that question other than to say, that's. I don't presume to understand the psychology of such people. I guess that's what I would say.
Anyone else? Yeah.
The title of the talk is starting to talk about ethics, but most of the talk you refer to it as moral and morality. Are you distinguishing between those two, or do you know synonyms?
They're right. No, in this case, thank you. I was not distinguishing. I was using them as synonymous, which people generally do in conversation. There are philosophers who distinguish ethics and morality. There was a book that I edited with Rabbi Elliot Dorff many years ago now, called Jewish Ethics and Morality, and partly was about morals. It was about theory, and partly was about practice, and people use those two terms sometimes to make that distinction, but that's not what I was doing. Tonight I was using them interchangeably. Thank you for the clarification. One? Yeah, somebody else?
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you find the right balance between justice and mercy?
Oh my goodness. I feel like that's another talk, actually. How do you find the balance between justice and mercy? It's interesting. I wrote an article at one point that, in fact, talks about the balance between justice and mercy in the context of the obligation to forgive. I'm not going to go through that whole article, but I will say this: I don't think it's ever clear. I think that it's a fuzzy line, and it's a discernment, I think, that people make, and people make it differently. People sometimes fall more on the side of we need to be just, we need to be strictly weeding out justice, And sometimes people incline a little more on the side of being more compassionate and giving people maybe better than they deserve, because it's the loving thing to do, it's the godly thing to do. Right, so I think our tradition associates God with both justice and mercy, and that's part of what makes it hard. I think is that both of them seem to be very powerful, important qualities, and godly qualities. So it's a balancing act. I think, that way.
Jimmy?
Yeah.
Beautiful that you got into it to be wrong. Difficult. What about people who don't want God? We still have a lot of difficult people who don't want God. Unless God is there and we just don't know.
Right. No. I want to go back and say, this is not about whether people are more moral or less moral if they do or don't believe in God. I'm not talking about that. I'm only saying that in the context of Jewish ethics assumes that we are in relationship with God in the various ways that I talked about. And if you do buy into that way of thinking about ethics, then it has all sorts of implications for how we think about our moral lives, the decisions that we make. That's all. It doesn't mean that you can't have a very moral life and not believe in God, but it wouldn't be classically Jewish moral life in the ways that I've just described.
To be at the back?
Sorry?
That's what it is.
Someone in the back? Yeah.
Joseph.
Is morality innate, and then it gets corrupted later in life?
Boy, I was not prepared for the level of deep, really seriously, very deep questions you're asking. I don't mean to make light of them. In fact, they're profound questions.
Repeat the question.
Yes, the question is morality innate, or is it something, is it innate and something we sort of, how did you put it, it gets corrupted later on? Well, you know, our liturgy includes every morning the line, Hanshama Shanatata Bi Tohorahi, right? The soul that you implanted within me is pure. What does that mean exactly? Does it mean we were moral, somehow purely moral? Like, I don't think that's right. Infants can certainly harm other people. Maybe not exactly with their infants, but certainly by the time they're toddlers, I guarantee you they definitely know how to harm other people, right? So it isn't as though, I don't know about whether people are purely moral somehow and then lose it or get corrupted. I guess I'd like to say that the ability to do good and the ability to do evil is intrinsic in all of us all the time, from birth to death. And sometimes we incline to do more good, and sometimes, as this gentleman over here was saying, we incline to do more evil, and that becomes the defining character of our lives. Right, but the truth is, I think the possibility of doing both is always there. That's my belief personally. If I were pressed on that, I guess maybe I'd have to qualify that a little bit. I think that's the way
I think
Yeah.
Sam will.
Yeah.
So you talk about how if we acknowledge that we come from nothing and go to nothing and are judged by what we believe to be this ultimate force, that it perforce makes one humble, or at least makes being humble the most logical position. In college, I knew a net utilitarian, and arguably that should make somebody an incredibly humble person. And they actually committed to a lot of it, and they were very arrogant. There can be a certain arrogance that comes with the idea that, but I'm doing the right thing. And in knowing the right thing, doesn't an arrogance lie there? How are we to avoid being arrogant because, right, we have this path laid out for us here?
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something a little different, Samuel, and I'd have to talk a little more, I think, to get really clear about what you're. Yeah, I'm sorry. This was about. It's hard to summarize what you said because it was a person that he knew who was a utilitarian. Go back. Utilitarianism is a philosophy that involves what?
No, I was just
Yeah, that involves sort of people define what is good as what maximizes some particular thing, most often happiness. The thing that creates the most happiness in the world is the right thing to do, for example. Okay? We can argue about whether that's a good way of thinking about what's right or what's wrong. That's another question. But the point is that the person that he was referring to held that philosophy and was very arrogant in it because he felt like he had the absolute answer to what was right. And I think what I was pointing to here was not about, you know, the kind of very concrete, is abortion right or wrong? And in what circumstances is it right or wrong? That's a very practical, concrete question. I don't think that anything I talked about tonight makes one any more or less certain about the answer to that question. Right? What I was talking about was at a sort of a different level of abstraction. It was to say, all of us deal with morality all the time. Every time we have an interaction with somebody else, we are basically in the sphere of morality. And that doesn't mean that we have the answers to what the right thing to do is in any given case. But if we think of our lives and our moral lives writ large in this way that Micah talks about and that I tried to expound, that gives it a different character. It gives our moral lives. It doesn't mean that we have a better answer or a worse answer to any particular moral dilemma, but it means that we think about our moral selves differently. And it doesn't make us any more certain about any specific answer to any specific question.
One more question.
Yes, please.
My question, I believe that our God created us within us whole concept of morality, and it's something we have to discover. So it turns out, as we discover the rules of behavior, we live a healthier life. It turns out, living according to the morality that God created will give us a longer life, a healthier, happier life.
I'm not going to dispute you. I'm not going to.
Well, this is what I'm saying.
By all means, I don't want to dissuade you from that belief in any way.
If you follow these concepts according to the concept of
Yeah.
moral,
Yeah.
you live a healthier and happier life.
I hope you're right.
No, I'm sure it's
Yeah. Yeah.
One more.
There's one more question. This gentleman here.
All right. Since you talk about Jewish morality and ethics, is there a difference between Jewish sects in terms of Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, in terms of what's ethical and what's morality?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. Yeah, the question again was, is there a difference? When I talked about Jewish ethics, is there a difference between Orthodox Jewish ethics, conservative Jewish ethics, Reform Jewish ethics, I don't know, Hasidic Jewish ethics, whatever, like we could, various flavors of Jewish, tradition. What I would say is this, all of us have as a common heritage the stuff that's in here and many, many, many other books that you have in your library, right? The classical tradition of Judaism is our collective inheritance. And that tradition, including the pieces I quoted, right, has a very particular way of thinking about our moral life, what it means to be moral. Now, in the modern period, people have radically reinterpreted even what that tradition means to them and how it ought to be lived out in this, 21st century context. But what I was trying to argue for was not any particular modern interpretation of this. I was trying to articulate what I think the sort of core of Jewish tradition teaches us. And what people do with that, what parts of it they elevate or set aside or emphasize or reinterpret. I think, yes, there are certainly variations. There are certainly differences between what Solomon Freehoff, who was a famous Reform rabbi, had to say about certain ethical issues, and what Elliot Dorff had to say about them, and what various other Orthodox figures had to say. But there are certainly differences in the way people interpret this tradition, but they're interpreting the same tradition, and I was focusing on that for purposes of this conversation. I think we're going to stop there, but thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience, and I look forward to the rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Professor Newman, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and especially the people who did all the organizing for tonight. And please.